Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my August book haul video. Normally, every month, I buy anywhere from 9 to 13 or 14 books. Typically, it's usually around the 10 to 12 range, typically, but there's been some months where I haven't quite reached double digits, and some months where I've bought a little bit more. This month, for almost the entire month, looked like it was going to be a typical month. And then all of a sudden, there was the penny a page deal at my local bookstore where you could buy 5 books for a penny a page, basically. And they included used hardcovers as part of the deal. And there were some used hardcovers that I had been eyeing for a while, but the regular price of their used hardcovers just wasn't good enough for me to justify getting it myself. So I had waited and thought about it, and then finally this penny a page deal came out, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to go buy those. So I bought 5 books as part of the penny a page deal, and I'll set those aside. In total for the month, I bought 18 books. I might have to look through the records, but I'm pretty sure that's my record. Most books bought in a month. Had no intention of doing that. So 13 of them were normal buys, and then 5 of them were part of that penny a page deal that I'll talk about. And 2 of these books are very unlike the others because I would ordinarily not have bought these books, but I find them very interesting. So let's go through. The first book on my list of what I bought in August is The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Trying to find different things to get into. I've heard good things about this. A classic science fiction, one of the first real science fiction novels that I'm aware of. It's short and pretty quick to read from what I understand, and I believe it's only like not even 200, right about 200 pages in total, so it should be a little fun read. So that's one of the books I bought. I actually bought this new at Barnes & Noble because it wasn't that expensive, because it was mass market. I also purchased some John Grisham books this month. The first one I'll talk about is The Chamber by him, one of his longer books. Most of his books are like 400 pages-ish, and then his Jake Brigance books get into the 600-page territory, and then a few of them are 200 or 300 pages. This one gets into the 600-page territory. This is it's about 650 pages. It's one of his longest books. It's called The Chamber, and when I read the write-up for it, it sounds very much like a John Grisham book. I also purchased a John Grisham book called The King of Torts. Again, very much a John Grisham type book. I'm as I'm recording this, finishing up a John Grisham book today, and it's just delightful. And so I'm just really enjoying reading his works. And there is no shortage of them left for me to read. I've read at this point about 8, and I think he has like 50-something. So that's plenty of more for me to read. Next, I have a self-published book that I bought this month titled A Savage Country by Morgan Shank. This is a beautiful cover on this book, just gorgeous. It's the same cover artist that he used for his last book. I'm going to check to see if I can find the name of the cover artist. I am blanking at a moment, but anyway, it's a terrific book. I actually got the opportunity to read it in an ARC form, as an ebook ARC, and I loved it, and I gave Morgan my thoughts on it. I did read the first book in this series called A Low Country, which you can check out both my review of the book and my interview with the author Morgan Shank, which was a lot of fun to do, one of my first big author interviews. And so it is a self-pub, so it's a small deal, but Morgan's a great guy, so you should check out this. If you like westerns and fantasy combined with a little bit of grimdark in there, I think you'll enjoy this book. So that's why I bought this one, and it's really good. I do give my hearty approval of it. The next book is an author that a couple months ago had never heard about. And recently, I've learned a lot about him. And that is Brad R., and I want to say his name correctly, Torgerson. Torgerson, I believe, and it's his book, The Chaplains War. This is one of those Baen books. Baen is a publisher I've worked with in reviewing and interviewing authors. They're a great publisher, great science fiction work and fantasy work, and this is a science fiction book. Brad is part of the cohort of authors who is from Utah. He is ex-military, and he's just a very fascinating person. He writes a lot on Twitter, and he has some interesting insight into different issues. I don't always agree with him, but he really, I think, is just a fascinating person to follow. So I got this book, and I saw him recommend this as a good first book for anyone to read of his, and it also happens, from what I understand, to be his debut novel. So I'm excited to read this. It's not too long. It's only about 350 pages in this big trade format paperback, and I bought this used at the local bookstore. I also bought some Star Trek books from my local used bookstores. One of them is Ishmael by Barbara Hambly. I've heard that there are some interesting references in this book. I've also heard that Barbara Hambly is a fantastic author. I have not read any of her works, but I know she wrote Star Wars books, I know she wrote Star Trek books, and then I know she wrote fantasy books, and she's the person that got Brandon Sanderson to become a big reader with her book Dragon's Bane. But this book I've heard interesting things about, and it was pretty cheap, so I thought, you know what, I'll get this one. One of those, it looks very classic. It's number 23 if you follow the numbered Star Trek books. It's got that kind of yellowish paging, so you know it's getting old. I also bought, and I'll talk about these two books together, even though I bought them at different bookstores, and those are the Gateways books. One Small Step by Susan Wright, and Demons of Air and Darkness by Keith R.A. DeCandido. These are two of the books in the Gateways series, which, from what I understand, crosses over from every major Star Trek show at the time. The first one is the original series. There's some Deep Space Nine crossover, which is this book. There's also a Next Generation crossover. There's a Voyager crossover. There's a New Frontier crossover. You know, the series that Peter David did. And so I'm not going to read these for a while, but I thought I'm going to go ahead and start collecting them so that when I do want to read them, I will have them. And it looks like an interesting enough series premise, although the reviews have not been wonderful for the series. So I'm interested to see what I think about it. Next, I have a bunch of Star Wars books to get through before I get to the penny a page books that I bought. These Star Wars books, I just slowly started seeing them in one of my local used bookstores, and I bought some of them for two reasons. One, because they're Star Wars books that I wanted to read, but two, I thought they were books that I could potentially bring into my classroom that would be age appropriate for my 5th and 6th graders. So that some of these are middle grades. So one of them is by Jason Fry. It is titled Weapon of a Jedi. It is a Luke Skywalker adventure as part of the Journey to the Force Awakens series. And I love these kind of series, these Journey to series. They don't really have heavy tie-ins, but they have very light references and Easter eggs and tie-ins to the different movies that I find fascinating, with art by Phil Noto inside. And so I got this book for a reasonable price, and I thought, you know what, I'll try to read it. It should be a nice quick read since it's middle grade. I've read some EU middle grade books and a few canon middle grade books, and so I thought I'd get this one. Keeping with the kind of idea of the Journey to Force Awakens, this book doesn't have that banner on it, but it was essentially part of the Journey to the Force Awakens series, and that is Greg Rucka's Before the Awakening. The Journey to the Force Awakens had 3 middle grade books that featured Luke, Han, and Leia. One by Jason Fry, this one, and then you had one by Greg Rucka, which focused on Han, and then you had one that focused on Leia, written by Cecil Castellucci, and also Jason Fry. And so those 3 came out months before the movie came out. From my understanding, this book came out right about the time the movie did, like a week or two maybe before the movie came out. And so this is basically a short story collection. It's like 3 stories, one about Finn, one about Rey, one about Poe, all by Greg Rucka. And Greg Rucka wrote a comic series called Shattered Empire, which is one of my favorite comics of all time. And so I thought, you know what, I'll give this one a try. It should be nice and fun. It won't be terribly entertaining because he couldn't give away too much, but he had enough that he could give away some of the story that might be fun to read. So this book, from what I understand, is like a prologue to The Force Awakens, which is why it's titled Before the Awakening, which I find fascinating. The next book is probably one of the least well-reviewed books that I've purchased recently, but I'm really fascinated to get into it, and that's the book, the Cobalt Squadron book from Elizabeth Wein. It is part of the journey to the Last Jedi. Again, for some reason, they decided not to put the Journey 2 on this one, even though it's part of that series, and it should have been, because that's great marketing, I think. They put the Last Jedi on here, but not the Journey 2. Anyway, that's just a small nitpick. This is a book following Rose Tico and Paige Tico, basically explaining where was Cobalt Squadron during the events of The Force Awakens that leads into The Last Jedi. And from what I understand, the book, at least on Goodreads, did not get stellar reviews. And Elizabeth Wein's one of those authors that she's known for writing these kind of critically acclaimed novels, but I don't see many like general booktubers talking about her books as much. So I'm curious to see what I think of Cobalt Squadron. So the next two books are the most interesting books to me personally that I bought this month, because they're books I, first of all, would ordinarily not normally buy, but also because I just find them super interesting. The first one is the Star Wars fiction collection, the Star Wars Insider fiction collection, that was published by Titan. It's the second of these fiction collections, and it features a bunch of authors' short stories from Star Wars Insider, and it also features a lot of artwork. Almost every single page features artwork and features short stories. About a little bit over half the short stories are from the Legends timeline, and then there's also some canon short stories in here as well. And a lot of my favorite Star Wars authors are part of the contributors to this. You have Timothy Zahn, John Jackson Miller, Delilah Dawson, Jason Fry, Michael Kogi, Alexander Freed, James S.A. Corey, Jennifer Heddle, who's one of the editors now, Jason Hugh, Joe Schreiber, Janine Spinlove, Edward Erdelac, Murray Lafferty, Sullivan Nuevel, and Paul S. Kemp. So a lot of famous, some of these names aren't as famous for Star Wars, but some of them are. And I saw it for a very reasonable price at my bookstore, and I thought, you know what, I'm not a big short story person, but I'll get into it. So that's that. Next is a comic. I do not buy comics, like maybe I buy like one bind up of comics every year, if that. Like, I really don't buy that many comics. The totality of the comics I own are literally make up this little space up here, like a tiny little space. So I don't read comics much. That being said, I saw this Kanan, the Last Padawan comic bind up. It's written by Greg Weisman, and I saw this for again, reasonable price at my local used bookstore. And I already had the first bind up of the first 6 issues, but I didn't have the second set of 6 issues. I hadn't seen them in my local bookstore. And I had been wanting to finish the series eventually. And so this gives me both, and in a hardcover format, which I really like. I love this cover art. This is just beautiful cover art. And it was actually the first 6 issues were some of my least favorite Star Wars comics, but I'm interested to see if the second 6 issues bolster it up or don't. So I'm really fascinated by this, and this was written after Greg Weisman left the writing on the show, but they brought him in to write this comic before he left, and this comic kind of got overridden by the Bad Batch, and it just got some interesting things, and I'm considering bringing it into being a part of my Journey to Ahsoka series that I'm doing right now on the channel. So this is a nice 12-issue bind-up that I'll probably be able to read like that, with a nice hardcover edition. So those are the regular books I bought. I also have the 5 penny-a-page books that I bought at my local bookstore. I got 5 hardcovers. Normally these books were priced together at about $65. I was able to get them for $20. So I was very pleased with the book haul that I was able to get because of this penny a page thing. And it was like for a day only. And it was interesting because this bookstore, you'll see, 7, 8, 9 people in there. It's a reasonably sized store. If you've ever been to a typical Books A Million, it's about the size of a typical Books A Million. A little bit smaller than your typical Barnes & Noble, but Barnes & Noble has restructured, so your typical Barnes & Noble's smaller anyway. But it's a reasonably sized store. But today, because of this penny a page deal, the store was filled with, like, I'm not kidding, 100 people. It was nuts. In a good way, because people were buying books and hopefully reading books. And the store was getting probably a lot of business and a lot of notoriety, but the lines were very long. But I was able to get a great deal on these books. So let's go through them. I have a few Star Trek books, I have a mystery novel, and I have a kind of horror post-apocalyptic book. So the first book I'll talk about is the Star Trek First Contact novelization by J.M. Dillard. Probably hailed as the best of the next-gen movies was First Contact. And for a while, my favorite was Generations, but now that I'm a bit older and I've watched the movies more often, I think that First Contact is the best. It's not a great movie, but I think it's the best of the next-gen movies. And J.M. Dillard has written some novelizations that I thought were wonderful for Star Trek, and I have some regular novels of hers I have yet to read. And so this one, ordinarily, the price point wasn't worth it since it's such a short book, but because of the penny a page deal, I was like, I'm going to get that. I also got another Star Trek novelization, also by J.M. Dillard, and that's the Insurrection novelization in hardcover. Again, a book I ordinarily wouldn't be particularly interested. All my other novelizations I have are mass market paperback, and because those were much cheaper. But when I saw this as part of the penny a page deal, I was like, you know what? It's worth it. I'll get it. And so I paid like $2 for it, which was pretty nice. And this is one of the most forgettable and boring Star Trek movies, but at least it feels like a Star Trek movie. It feels, honestly, like a Star Trek episode of television just stretched into like an hour and a half long movie, which is not great. But regardless, I'm interested to read the book and see what insights and tidbits that J.M. Dillard has in the book. The last of the Star Trek books, I promise, is the Picard novel, The Dark Veil by James Swallow. I own all the other Picard novels. I'm kicking myself for not getting one of the other Picard novels in hardcover. I have The Last Best Hope, which is one of my favorite Star Trek novels in trade paperback, and then the other Picard novels I have in hardcover. But this book, The Dark Veil, is the second book. It follows Riker and Troy when they were on the I almost called it the Enterprise, because it is the Enterprise. When they were on the Titan, for those of you who have watched Picard, when they were on the Titan, and I'm interested to see how this book matches up and feels after watching Picard Season 3. Before watching Picard Season 3, if I had read this book, I feel like I would have been so dejected by it. But now that Picard Season 3 is come out, and I loved it, one of my favorite pieces of Star Trek storytelling ever, I wonder if I'll actually really enjoy the book and it'll give me some great context. So I'm actually really excited to read this one. All right. For the mystery book I bought this month, it is The Cuckoos Calling by Robert Galbraith. And some of you might be scratching your heads because that name sounds familiar. The reason it sounds familiar is because it's the pen name of J.K. Rowling. I have seen this book in my local bookstore for years. For multiple years, I have been seeing this book in hardcover. They had multiple copies of it, but the price point for a hardcover was outrageous. And I thought, no way am I going to spend that much on a hardcover. And literally every time I go back in that bookstore, which is about once a week, I go to my bookstores once a week, and I would go back and see if they had a paperback edition of this book. And they didn't. They only had hardcovers for years. And I was always like, well, if I'm going to spend that much money on a book, I may as well get a new book that's in good condition. I may as well get a new book that I'm really excited about. This was a book that I'm interested in reading it, but I'm not willing to pay huge prices for it. And then with this penny a page deal, it brought the price down by a third, and so I was willing to buy the book. And I'm very excited to see where it goes. And I know she's written a lot of these, and they get really long towards the end, and they get controversial towards the end. So I'm interested to see where this series goes. I know that Robert Galbraith. That I know that J.K. Rowling is not the most popular person right now, but I'm interested to see what I think of the book. The final book I bought this month, is the biggest book I bought this month, and I'm really worried about my tower over here surviving. But the biggest book and last book I bought was the originally priced most expensive book of the bunch. But again, because of the penny a page deal, it brought the price down significantly. Despite the fact that it's a huge book, this deal still helped. And that was Wanderers by Chuck Wendig, published by Del Rey, who also at the time was the publisher for the Star Wars novels. It's now like a new imprint that they added. It's now Random House Worlds, but Del Rey was the imprint up through about 2022. And anyway, Wanderers is his kind of apocalyptic horror type novel. Chuck Wendig has written some books that I really enjoyed. I thought that Invasive was really clever, and I am one of the few Star Wars fans that really enjoyed Aftermath. It worked for me. I know why it didn't work for everyone else, and I'm not saying they're wrong for feeling that, but it worked for me. And Wanderers, I read the write-up of it, and I was like, ooh, I might enjoy that. I might have a lot of fun with that. But it's a big book. It's a big commitment, so I don't know when I'll get to it. But the penny a page deal made it well worth it. So I bought this book, and it was the final book I bought this month, and I'm interested to read it because and Chuck Wendig has written books I haven't loved. I did not love his book Zero Zeros. That book wasn't great. So those are all of the books I bought. What books did you buy this month? I'm interested in hearing that. What do you think of my purchases? Which books are you most interested in seeing me read and review for the channel? Which books did you read and not enjoy at all? Let me know all those thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.